I work as a data analyst for a mid-sized logistics company outside of Columbus, Ohio. It's one of those jobs that sounds straightforward enough. You're tracking shipments, running numbers, filing reports, making sure the data flowing through the company is clean and accurate. On paper, it's about as unglamorous as office work gets. But I genuinely didn't mind it. I liked the rhythm of it. I liked knowing that when I got something right, freight was moving and people were getting what they needed on time. The nature of logistics means the work doesn't stop at 5 o'clock. Shipments move around the clock, problems come in at odd hours, and there were plenty of nights where I'd find myself voluntarily staying late to finish something I didn't want to leave half done. My co-workers will tell you I was the type to overinvest. My manager Dan used to joke that I had a harder time leaving the building than most people have leaving a casino. This particular Thursday night in October was one of those nights. We had a large regional client whose data had come in corrupted, and I'd spent most of the day working backward through the file to figure out where things had gone wrong. By the time I'd isolated the problem, it was already after 7, and fixing it properly was going to take another couple of hours minimum. Dan stopped by my desk on his way out. He asked me if I was sure I wanted to stay. I said yes. He looked at me for a second, the way managers do when they're weighing whether or not to push back. Then he pulled his key ring out of his jacket pocket, unclipped the office key, and set it on my desk. "Lock up when you leave," he said, "and go home at a reasonable hour." I told him I would. He laughed because he knew I wouldn't. And then he was gone. Our office sits on the 3rd floor of a business complex, one of those nondescript multi-tenant buildings you see all over mid-size American cities. Brick exterior, a parking lot that's never quite big enough, a lobby with one of those fake wood-paneled front desks that's only staffed until 6. Our floor is a single long rectangle. A row of private offices runs along the window-facing side of the building. Those are for the managers and senior staff. The rest of the floor is an open cubicle bay where the rest of us work. At the far end of the floor, there's a narrow hallway that leads to a break room on the left and a copy room directly across from it on the right. My desk was positioned roughly in the middle of the open bay. I had a direct sight line to most of the floor, including that far hallway if I turned my head. I was deep in the spreadsheet. Headphones on, music low, the kind of low where you're really using it more as a focus tool than actually listening to it. The floor around me was dark. Just my overhead light, the glow of my monitor. The windows behind the private offices showed the parking lot lights and the distant glow of the highway. Rain had started coming down sometime, around 8. I could hear it faintly against the glass. That's when something pulled my eyes up from the screen. The copy room light was on. I sat there for a moment, just staring at it. That thin strip of brightness coming from under the copy room door and the faint spill of light through the small window panel in the upper half of the door. I thought back to when Dan had left. He'd walked right past that hallway on his way to the elevator. I would have noticed if that light had been on. You notice things like that when most of the floor is dark. Brightness draws your eye naturally. But here I was at almost 9 o'clock and the copy room was lit up. I pulled one headphone off and listened. The building's HVAC system ran its steady low drone. The rain hit the windows. Nothing else. I sat there weighing it. There are 100 mundane explanations for a light being on in a room you didn't think anyone was using. Maybe a cleaning crew member had ducked in and not turned it off. Maybe it had been on all along and I just hadn't noticed it through my focus haze. The brain is incredibly good at filtering out background information when it's locked onto a task. I was aware of that. I reminded myself of it deliberately. I went back to my screen. 22 minutes later. I know because I looked at the clock at the bottom of my monitor when I got up. I pushed back from my desk and headed down the hallway to grab water from the break room. I was running low, and my coffee had long gone cold. I walked past the copy room. The light was off. I stopped. Stood there in the narrow hallway with the break room door on my left and the copy room door on my right. The copy room doesn't have a motion sensor light. I knew this with certainty because there had been a small maintenance debate about installing them about a month earlier, and the decision had been to hold off for budget reasons. The lights in that room were controlled by a standard wall switch just inside the door on the left. Someone had physically turned that light off, or on, one or the other, and I hadn't heard a single sound. I pushed the copy room door open and looked inside. Empty. Paper stacked on the shelves in that slightly chaotic way office supply shelves always look. The machine sitting idle, its little standby light glowing orange. The wall switch in the off position. Nothing out of place. Nobody hiding behind the door or crouched against the wall. I stood in the doorway for a moment longer than I needed to. Then I got my water and went back to my desk. But something had shifted in the atmosphere of the floor. Or maybe just in my head. That low background awareness you get when you're somewhere alone at night that normally stays quiet and manageable had gotten louder. I was more conscious of the dark sections of the floor around me, more conscious of the sounds. The rain had picked up and was coming harder now. And somewhere down below, a car alarm had started going off in the parking lot. I focused back on the data. I was close to finishing. Maybe another half hour of solid work and I could call it done and go home. I don't know exactly how long I worked before I got up to use the restroom down the hall. 5 minutes, maybe. Maybe 15. I was in that tunnel vision state where time stops registering normally. I pushed back from my desk and stood up, and that's when I noticed it. My chair had been pushed in. I want you to understand something about me and desk chairs. It is a minor character flaw that my wife has mentioned more than once. I never push my chair in when I get up. Never. Not at home, not at work, not ever. It's one of those small, unconscious habits that drives organized people crazy. Every person who has ever sat near me in an office has at some point pushed my chair in themselves out of sheer reflex. When I got up to go to the break room, I had pushed back from the desk the way I always do. Chair rolling back and to the left slightly, left sitting at whatever angle momentum took it. It was now sitting squarely tucked under the desk, pushed in with the armrests aligned neatly with the edge of the desk surface. I looked at it for what felt like a long time. Then I looked at the floor around me. The open cubicle bay, the dark rows of empty desks, the distant glow of the highway through the far windows, the hallway at the end of the floor. "Hello?" I said. My voice came out flat in the empty space. The HVAC hummed. The rain hit glass. No other sound. I stood there for a full minute, not moving. Watching. Listening. Nothing. I told myself I'd push the chair in without thinking. Autopilot. The brain does strange things when it's tired and running on bad coffee and overtime hours. I had been on autopilot all night. It was completely possible that some part of my motor memory had done something my conscious mind hadn't registered. I went down the hall and used the restroom and walked back to my desk. The copy room light was on again. I could see it from where I was standing. That same strip of brightness under the door. That same glow through the window panel. I did not go investigate this time. I sat back down at my desk with a very specific kind of calm that I've since come to recognize as the calm of someone who has decided the correct response to a frightening situation is to behave as if everything is completely normal until they can get somewhere safe. I pulled up my work. I finished it. I did not look at the copy room hallway more than I had to. I saved everything twice. I packed up my bag with deliberate, unhurried movements. I put on my jacket. I picked up Dan's keys. I walked to the elevator at a pace that was technically a normal walking speed, but did not include any hesitation or stopping or looking back. I hit the lobby, nodded at the overnight desk, pushed through the front door into the rain. I got to my car and sat in the driver's seat for a moment, just breathing. Then I looked up at the third floor, the copy room window, third from the left on the far end. Dark. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds watching it. The light came on. I drove home. The next morning I told Dan. He did that thing where he listened patiently and then offered the building's old wiring as the explanation. Said the lights on that floor had been doing strange things for months. Said maintenance had been meaning to look at it. I asked him about the chair. He didn't have an explanation for that one. Neither do I. I spent almost 3 years as a front desk receptionist at a mid-sized law firm in downtown Chicago. If you've never worked reception at a law firm, you should know that the job carries a very specific kind of quiet pressure. You're the first thing clients see when they walk through the door. You're managing schedules, fielding calls, keeping the front of house running without a ripple. On the surface, the job looks administrative. Underneath it, you're constantly aware of the fact that the people moving through your space are stressed, often in the worst chapters of their lives, and your job is to make the environment feel like it isn't. I was good at it. I liked it even. There's a particular satisfaction in being the person who keeps things steady when everything around you is complicated. The firm took up the entire 14th floor of a high-rise on Michigan Avenue. You stepped off the elevator into a small lobby with glass entry doors. Frosted glass with the firm's name etched into it in clean sans-serif letters. My desk sat directly inside those doors, positioned so that I had a view of both the entrance and the central hallway that ran the length of the floor behind me. Attorney offices lined both sides of that hallway. 4 conference rooms sat at the far end. The whole thing was clean and professional and deliberately unfrightening in every possible way, except for the back stairwell. Every high-rise has 2 stairwells, the main one off the lobby that everyone uses for drills, and the occasional fitness enthusiast, and a secondary fire exit that most people forget exists. Ours was tucked at the very end of the 14th floor hallway behind the last conference room. A heavy metal door with a push bar, the kind that exhales a particular pressurized sound when it opens, like the building drawing a quick breath. That door was not a normal part of anyone's day. I'd used it twice in 3 years, both times for fire drills. On a Friday evening in February, the kind of February in Chicago that makes you question all of your life choices. The last attorney had said goodbye just before 7. The cleaning crew came through on Fridays, and they were done by 7:30. I had stayed behind to process some end-of-week filing that I'd let pile up. It was work I could do on a Monday, but I'm the kind of person who doesn't like leaving loose ends over a weekend. I watched the cleaning crew leave. The overnight elevator attendant, a guy named Nate who always had a thermos of coffee and a sports radio app running, told me to holler if I needed anything. The building desk was staffed until midnight, and then the floor was mine. I actually liked being alone in the office. Some people find it unsettling. I always found it peaceful. The quality of quiet in an office after everyone has left is different from regular quiet. It's deeper somehow. The building breathes differently. The floor settles. You become aware of sounds you'd normally never notice. The low vibration of the elevator shaft, the temperature ticks of the heating system, the faint distant murmur of the city 20 floors down. I was at my desk, half the filing done, when I heard the back stairwell door open. Not creak, not slam. Open. That specific pressurized exhale of a fire door being pushed from the stairwell side. Unmistakable. I knew that sound. I looked up from my desk and looked down the hallway. Dim. The overhead lights in the main hallway stayed on after hours, but the lights deeper in, down by the conference rooms, switched to emergency-only mode after 7. So the far end of the hallway was a low amber glow and shadow. Nothing moved. No figure stepping through, no sound of footsteps. I heard the door close again. I sat very still for a moment listening. Then I decided it was a building maintenance worker cutting through. It happened occasionally. The stairwells connected all the floors, and building staff moved through them freely. I'd seen it happen before, usually during the day. I went back to my filing. About 12 minutes later, I heard the door again. That same pressurized breath of it opening. And this time, footsteps. Slow, measured footsteps on the carpet, moving down the hallway from the far end toward the front of the floor. Toward me. I stood up from my desk. I watched the hallway. The footsteps stopped. The amber emergency lighting sat still. Shadows sat still. Nothing moved. I waited what felt like a long time, but was probably 30 seconds. Hello? My voice echoed slightly in the empty reception area. Is someone there? Silence. The distant hum of the building. Nothing else. I picked up my phone from the desk and turned on the flashlight and walked to the entrance of the hallway. I pointed the beam down the length of it. Empty. Every office door closed. Every conference room dark. The back stairwell door at the far end closed. I stood there with the flashlight beam cutting through the amber half-dark for a solid minute. I moved it into doorways, into corners. Nothing. Nobody. Okay. I went back to my desk. I finished the filing. I put on my coat and got my bag. I was going to stop by the last conference room on my way to the elevator because I'd left my umbrella in there earlier in the week. One of those things I'd been meaning to grab every day and kept forgetting. I pushed open the conference room door and reached inside to the wall for the light switch. The back stairwell door was open. Not slightly ajar. Open. Pushed back against the wall inside the conference room, held there by the kickstop on the bottom. I had heard it close. Twice. The second time just before I'd walked down there with my flashlight. I had shone the light directly at it and it was closed. I stood in the conference room doorway, looking at the open stairwell door and the black space beyond it. I left without the umbrella. I walked to the elevator at a pace I am not going to pretend was casual. I called Nate from the elevator. He came up. We walked the floor together. Stairwell empty. No sign of anyone. Cameras in the elevator lobby showed nothing entering or exiting the 14th floor after the cleaning crew. Nate offered his own explanation. The door latch on that stairwell was loose, had been for months, and air pressure changes in the building from floors above or below could theoretically push it open. He said he'd put in a work order. Maybe. That's a reasonable explanation for the door. It doesn't explain the footsteps. I went back for the umbrella the following Monday morning. I made sure I wasn't alone. I want to preface this by saying that the person who hired me for this job, my direct supervisor at the time, is someone I've stayed in contact with over the years. His name is George, and if you asked him today, he would confirm everything I'm about to tell you. He was there for the beginning of it. He wasn't there for the part that still keeps me up some nights. But he was there for enough of it that I've never had to question my own memory. I worked overnight shifts at a medical billing office in Phoenix, Arizona. I know that sounds about as far from a horror story as you can get. Medical billing, Phoenix, a beige carpeted office in an office park off a major road, where the most exciting thing that usually happened was the vending machine running out of the good chips. But I promise you, this happened, and I promise you, I have never fully shaken it. The overnight shift ran from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. We processed billing submissions, handled coding reviews, ran compliance checks, things that could be done asynchronously, and that benefited from the quieter hours when the phone lines were slow. There were usually 3 of us on overnight. Me, a woman named Ruby, who sat 2 rows over from me and who I'd become friendly with. She had a dry sense of humor and always brought homemade snacks. And our overnight supervisor, George, who worked out of the corner office at the end of the back hallway. The office layout was fairly simple. One main room filled with workstations arranged in rows. That's where Ruby and I worked. Off the back of the main room ran a single straight hallway, maybe 40 feet long. Down that hallway on the right was the server room, always locked, accessible only to IT and management. On the left was a small single-occupancy restroom. And at the very end of the hallway was George's office, a corner office with a frosted window panel beside the door that glowed when his light was on. That frosted panel was visible from the main room if you were positioned right. From my workstation, at a slight angle, I could see the far end of the hallway and the edge of that frosted glass. When George's light was on, there was a visible warm glow coming from it. A small thing, but something I'd cataloged unconsciously over months of overnight shifts. The way you catalog every minor visual detail of a space you spend 40 hours a week in. On a Tuesday in late March, Ruby called in sick. She'd been fighting something for a few days. That specific tired-eyed look of someone losing a slow battle with a head cold. I'd told her to go home early the night before, and she'd waved me off, and then called in the following night, so I knew she'd finally listened. Around 2 in the morning, George appeared at the entrance to the main room with his jacket on and his keys in his hand. His face had that particular blankness of someone who has just gotten a phone call they weren't prepared for. He told me his father had been taken to the emergency room. Non-critical, he emphasized. But he needed to go. He asked me how much longer I had on my current review badge. I told him I was maybe 90 minutes out. He said he'd try to be back before the end of the shift, but he wasn't sure. He said to call him if anything came up. I told him I'd be fine. I'd worked alone before. He knew that. He gave me a short nod, turned off his office light, pulled his office door shut behind him. I heard the latch click from where I was sitting and walked out through the main entrance. The door to the office suite closed behind him and the electronic lock engaged. Just me. I put my head down and worked. I was close enough to the end of the review batch that I could feel it. That particular momentum you get when you can see the finish line. I put some music on low, got my water positioned properly, and ran through the remaining files methodically. I'm not sure exactly when I looked up and noticed it. George's light was on. I could see it from my workstation. That familiar warm glow at the far end of the hallway coming through the frosted panel beside his office door. I looked at it for a moment. My first thought, genuinely, was that he had come back, that his father was okay, and he'd turned around. I hadn't heard the front door, but I had music on, and sometimes when you're deep in focused work, you tune out sounds without meaning to. I got up and walked to the hallway entrance. George? My voice traveled down the 40 feet of hallway and met silence. I tried again, louder. George, is that you? Nothing. I walked down the hallway to his office door and knocked. 3 solid knocks. Waited. No sound from inside. I tried the handle. Locked. I stood in the hallway in front of his locked office door, looking at that frosted panel glowing with warm light, and I felt the specific cold discomfort of something that does not have a reasonable explanation. George had turned the light off. I had watched him do it. I had heard his door latch click shut. The door was locked. His personal office key was on his key ring, which he had taken with him. Nobody else had come in through the front entrance because the electronic lock would have made a sound. I went back to my workstation and texted George directly. Kept it casual. Just asked if he'd come back. His reply came in under a minute. He was at the hospital. He was definitely not back. I sat at my desk and looked at the hallway. The glow from the frosted panel was still there. Steady. Warm. I called the overnight building security line. The guard on duty was a man named Terrence. I'd talked to him a handful of times. A calm, no-nonsense guy who took his job seriously and wasn't the type to be rattled. I told him what I was seeing. He said he'd be up in a few minutes. I sat at my desk and watched the hallway while I waited. And at some point, I cannot give you an exact time because I was too focused on the hallway to look. At the clock, the glow went out. Not flickered, not faded. Off. The frosted panel went dark. The hallway went back to its after-hours dim. Terrence arrived about 4 minutes later. I walked him back to the hallway and explained what I'd seen. He listened without interrupting. The specific focused listening of someone taking a report seriously. He tried George's office door. Locked. He had a building master key. He used it. The office was empty. George's desk exactly as he'd left it. His second monitor in sleep mode. A coffee mug. Some folders. The wall switch on the left side of the door, in the off position. Terrence looked at the switch, looked at me, looked at the switch again. "You're certain the light was on?" he said. I told him I was absolutely certain. I'd seen it from my workstation. It was the same glow I'd seen every overnight shift for months when George was working. He checked the server room. Locked, undisturbed. Checked the restroom, empty. Walked the main room. Checked the entrance logs on the electronic door system. Nothing. No entries after George's departure at 2:07. Terrence stayed on the floor with me for the rest of the shift. We didn't talk a lot. He sat near the front entrance, and I finished my work, and we both waited for 6 o'clock with the particular silence of two people who are not going to say out loud what they're both thinking. I told George the next day. He listened the way you listen to something that sits in the uncomfortable space between impossible and undeniable. He didn't dismiss it. He didn't oversell it. He just said very quietly, "I'll have someone look at the wiring." Nobody found anything wrong with the wiring. I stayed at that job for another 3 months. Every overnight shift, I sat at my workstation with the hallway in my peripheral vision. Every time I needed the restroom, I walked down that hallway quickly and came back the same way. And every night I sat down at my desk. I looked first at the far end, at that frosted panel beside George's office door. Most nights it was dark, but there were 2 nights in those final 3 months, where I looked up from my work and the glow was back. Both times I called Terrence. Both times, by the time he arrived, it was gone. I handed in my notice at the end of June. I took a day shift position at a different company across town, and I have worked day shifts ever since. I still don't look at frosted glass panels in hallways the same way I used to.